Welcome to the Filmcast review of Heretic, which is available right now in theaters. I'm going to read the plot summary from the internet. Two young missionaries become ensnared in a deadly game of cat and mouse when they knock on the door of the diabolical Mr. Reed. End quote. All right, Devindra Hardawar, let's start with you. What did you think of Heretic?
Oh, I love this movie. Like I think it is a really interesting bit of psychological horror that taps into something I'm deeply interested in. I was one of those people in college who would spend a lot of time talking with people who were religious and just trying to figure out like what they were thinking and what kind of motivated them. Since high school, I think I was firmly on the like agnostic atheist stance. The more I read, the more I was just like we have just told ourselves stories, right? We've all told ourselves stories. These things have existed as sort of systems of control, and this movie really taps into that. And then it goes a little too far. You know, this is one of those movies where I'm like, really, I am actually really in line with what you're saying, Hugh Grant, but then you go too far, like Mr. Richard Dawkins or something. The atheist movement have had their share of assholes too. Not to this extent. But no, I think this movie is really well constructed. I love that it is so dialogue rich. It is such a battle of ideas, and is less flashy than I expected, judging from the trailer. Like there are horror movie elements to it, but it's just a sheer level of ideas and dialogue and character work kind of going on in those scenes too that I just really, really appreciated. Also, really funny to see Hugh Grant in a role like this too. I think we normally have always associated him with like the handsome rom-com guy or like the funny guy, like in the Paddington movies too. Like he really acquits himself really well there. There have been a lot of stories about him just as a person, as an actor, like what an asshole he could be to other people. And it's really interesting seeing this role kind of with that lens too. I think he is fantastic here though. Like
He's in this
yeah.
whole phase of his career now. Hugh
Mhm.
Grant is where he is playing bad guys.
Yeah.
And he's really leaning into his evolving looks in a way that I really appreciate. Because you're right. When we were growing up, he was kind of heartthrob status, Notting Hill and all those
all the others.
all the other movies that don't come to mind right now. But now he's like, hey, I realize like the face that I have has so many features. 4 weddings and a funeral. That's the other big one.
I've just noticed stuff about my face.
Yeah, and it's like this can be deployed in the service of creating a really threatening presence, and he's really doing that with movies like I think he was
like
the bad
Paddington
guy in
2.
Dungeons and Dragons. Paddington 2, Dungeons and Dragons. Also,
some Guy Ritchie stuff that he's
the
like
gentleman.
Right. Yeah. So
the screening that I went to of Heretic had a Q&A with him afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow!
And he explicitly
talked in person. You saw him in person?
Well, he was in person at a location that was then
see.
beamed to me.
Got it.
He was at a Alamo Draft House in I think Brooklyn,
and it
was beamed to the Alamo Draft House that I was sitting in Denver. But he specifically spoke to this point, and he said that 4 Weddings and a Funeral kind of shot him in a trajectory that he never intended and didn't really want. But he said you sort of roll with where where your bread is buttered. That's where you go. Like that's where they were. That's the parts that were being offered, and I wanted work, and so that's where I went. But he said he always preferred playing the bad guy. Like that's what he would want to do. And his first few roles as a young actor were like more of that kind of charactery, darker thing, and he just kind of went off for a few decades on this wild trajectory because of one.
He was cursed with being handsome, incredibly handsome.
I don't think he talked about it as a curse necessarily, or as something that he's like, hey, I'm he wasn't suffering through those roles, but he was just sort of as surprised as anybody else that that's where and he's like, but now that he has the opportunity to sort of circle her back to the darker stuff, he really enjoys doing it.
He can embrace his true nature now. Yeah.
Yes.
But anyway, Devindra loved Heretic. Jeff Kanata, curious what you thought about Heretic.
Well, Dave, I guess you could say what I thought about Heretic is best summed up in the form of a limerick.
Let's hear it, Jeff.
Religion as fodder for fear is accomplished so artfully here, And it was a blessing how it kept me guessing. Hugh Grant made the menace sincere. I also love this movie. Oh, this movie's awesome. I mean, it's my catnip, right? It's just people sitting in a room talking. But Devindra's so right that it is thrilling, this battle of ideas. And I love stuff like this. It is TED Talk, the horror movie. But I love that.
Great concept, by the way. I don't think anybody's done that yet. Save that, Jeff. Save that. That's your screenplay. Yeah.
Dang it. Did I just reveal my... Yeah. I couldn't help but compare Hugh Grant's performance here to Nicolas Cage's performance in Longlegs, where he's trying so hard to make it scary. And like, what is so much more menacing, what is so much more creepy and gets under my skin, I'm only talking about me personally, is normalcy.
Yeah.
That is, there's something wrong under the surface. Right?
Absolutely.
You can put on all the prosthetics and you can make the funny voice and you can do the odd thing. And there's a place for that. And like, I think it's kind of wacky and fun what Nicolas Cage did. Was it scary? For me, at no point was Nicolas Cage scary in Longlegs. At no point. Hugh Grant in this role is immediately off. Something is wrong, and you know it immediately. But he's the nicest guy in the world. And I loved that. Like, there's something so powerful about that, I think. And uncommon. Like, you don't see that a lot in film. Like, more often, if we're trying to scare you, we're going to go to that weird place. And I love that this movie mines all of that horror and terror and foreboding from something that is absolutely benign on the surface. Now, I also agree with Devindra. It is wild to see what is undeniably from the word go a villainous character saying all the things that I think. It is a wild experience to sit there and be like, I've heard nothing I disagree with yet. But I mean, this movie goes places. I had fun where it goes. I love, we'll get into it in spoilers, but I really had a blast with this movie. It is just so cool. The dialogue is so great. You have awesome actors. I think the two women in this movie, should not go underappreciated as well, because they have a very difficult job. Actually, Hugh Grant mentioned this in that little Q&A as well. He's like, they have to start, they're like 10 minutes into this movie, they have to be scared and they have to stay scared for the next hour and a half.
Right.
And it's like, that's a hard job. That's a hard job to maintain that and not let it be exhausting for the audience and sort of tiresome and uninteresting. And they are really, really great, I think. And
I agree. And we should say Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East are the actors' names.
Thank you. And I believe they are actual Mormons, playing Mormons. And so they come from this sort of place of it being deep-seated in their identity and their history and their upbringing. And I think that there's a sort of dignity that they bring to it that is interesting. I really am enamored with this movie. I think this is one of the coolest horror movies I've seen in years. I love Hugh Grant in it. I love that it really gives him stuff to say that makes you think. Like, this is one of those horror movies that at least for me, it gives me fodder to actually leave the theater and chew on. And but it also accomplishes the sort of pure visceral thing you want out of a thriller, where I'm on the edge of my seat throughout. And I'm, like I said in the limerick, guessing where it's going and trying to figure it out. And it surprised me a number of times. I think this movie's a home run.
Just to clarify, by the way, I believe they were both raised Mormon. Unclear if they still are today. But they had Mormon upbringing.
Grew up Mormon.
Guys.
Wow.
Guys.
Not Zemeckis-y enough for you?
All right. So, so here's what I like about this movie. I like that it actually is about like big ideas, and it's kind of, like here's the thing. I feel like I've seen so many of these movies this year of like spooky guy terrifies women or women in a house. There was like kind of a similar sequence like this movie in the movie Oddity. Speak No Evil kind of has similar vibes to this as well. So I feel like I've like seen this movie, and this movie.
Speak No Evil is more the sort of like manners, right? The culture of manners we have.
Yes, correct.
How
correct,
we will just go along with things.
And to be fair, that was about a family, not just women.
Yes.
But anyway, I feel like I've kind of seen this kind of movie before, and it's interesting that this movie actually injects like these big ideas into it about religion and faith and belief and so on, and like the movie gets a ton of credit for that alone. Like, just hey, this is an interesting spin on this kind of like trapped in a house genre of movie. And I think it's thought provoking in that way.
It's also about board games.
Yeah, it's also about board games. I think the first, like, I loved the first 40 minutes of this movie. Like, I thought it was like, wow. The way it kind of ratchets up the tension, and there's just, as you said, Jeff, something a little bit off about Hugh Grant. You can't pin it down, and the way that slowly reveals itself. Was not a fan of the final act of the film, and we can get into why that is the case. But so I'll say I would say I'm very mixed to positive on Heretic. I think, again, just the fact that it's doing something new and interesting, and there's some really well directed horror sequences that are like tense and uncomfortable. That makes this movie kind of worth watching. And then the movie really kind of falls apart at the end for me, for reasons I'll get into. So those are my overall thoughts.
Interesting reasons, and maybe has to do with the way we discuss religion, the way religion,
No, I think it's for much simpler reasons than that. but
maybe
anyway,
we'll see.
Anyway, so Jeff and Devindra are both huge fans. I liked it, but I'm much more mixed on it. So those are our overall thoughts on Heretic. But guys, let's talk about spoilers for this movie starting right now. I think the big issues I have with this movie are kind of narrative contrivances, specifically. My wife put it very astutely, which is she was very frustrated by this film because for the first part of the movie, she found it to be quite tedious, and like you're so far ahead of the characters, right? Like, the dude is creepy. You're like, get the F out of there. And it takes them so long to like figure out that they're in danger. In my opinion,
I don't think that's true. I think they figure out they're in danger pretty darn fast. I mean, honestly, I'm just saying they are in that awkward place of not knowing what to do about it. But I think they are like on the tip of like, there's no wife here. Pretty quick.
That's fair. That's fair, Jeff. I guess. I guess that's more of a commentary of how my wife and I would just have been like getting the F out of there like 30 seconds in. Like, probably wouldn't have even stepped foot in the door. Like, I'm physically laying eyes on the wife before I am stepping into this door. And so maybe that's what we're complaining. It's like, but you're right. What you're saying is fair. But then to go from that to then being like behind the characters, like by the end of the movie, specifically Sister Paxton, right? Who Chloe East's character seemingly gets like a personality transplant at the end of the movie. And I understand there are some pleasures in a movie for like, oh, the person who you thought wasn't going to be the cunning one actually turned out to be the one that's super smart. And it's like, okay, like I'm not opposed to that, but like it has to be like set up and built up to. A really good example of this, I would say, is remember that movie You're Next, the Adam Wingard movie? The idea is that like this house is being terrorized by these people, and then this woman in the movie, like you discover she grew up in like a survivalist compound, and she's like a complete badass, and like the way that her expertise like reveals itself over time is very satisfying in my opinion. Here in this movie, it's just like, oh, actually she just figured everything out, and also like she's not like a wilting flower like you thought she was, and it just feels
I think
not particularly satisfying to me. Anyway,
I think that's a fair criticism. My interpretation was more that she was tested in a way she had never been before and passed the test, right?
Yeah.
Like there is no way to set up her ability to do that because she has never been put in a situation where she had to find out if she could do that or not. And I think one thing that is established is that these are two very clever girls.
Yes.
Like they're very smart. And I love a movie that is confident enough to give you smart main characters when so much of what is required for them to be in danger is dumb stuff, like doing the not smart or suboptimal thing. But I think at every step of the way, they're pretty smart. They're thinking, they're planning, they're like, they figure out things throughout. And I think for me, getting to the point where she sort of like transcends her mousy nature worked because she's in this pressure cooker where it's like either do that or you're dead. So she has to do that. And it's like, I found it to be very, as you kind of indicated, I found it to be really exciting. Like, yeah, she did it. She did it.
Yeah. It's hard to say. Like, it's hard to put the finger on like what exactly would have made that work better, right? Like, I think the thing that really, like, I am totally sympathetic to that as an arc for a character. I think the thing that really was odd to me was like her personality seems to have been completely different by the end. And I know you can like something like this can like change a person. I get that, but like
I suspect all of our personalities would be slightly different in this.
But there's like no trace of like the character that we saw before by the end of the movie, and that's kind of like that was just odd to me as a creative decision. So anyway. I also think Hugh Grant's plan is like super elaborate.
Well, yeah.
It's one of those. But anyway,
that's the movie.
Yeah,
that's he gets a little too overboard with it.
That's his kink.
Yeah, I do want to say
it reminded me of it's like one of like Penn and Teller's things. Teller, the magician, one of his like secrets to being a magician is like always, one of the secrets to being a good magician is that often the magic trick is you put more work into it than people would think you should. Right?
Yeah, right.
And so I thought about that when Sister Paxton is like recounting what he did, and you switch the body out for another body, and it's like, who would actually go to that much work? And it's like this guy, this guy.
Well, I think that's his whole point is think about the ways in which these institutions are willing to present a false narrative to you to assert control, like the lengths they are willing to go to ensure that their doctrine is not questioned. I don't know.
Yeah, they have like massive meetings and shit where they like align on like actually what we said before that doesn't make sense anymore. It's the new thing now. That stuff happens all the time, right? Conclaves and such. Anyway, go ahead.
I do think it ultimately comes down to like this ends up being a really interesting debate of ideas and everything. But every religious debate ends in violence. Like that's ultimately that's how we wrap up this story. Who's more violent than the other? Like this is not really a battle of the ideas, but it's about who can, stab each other in the head fastest or more surprisingly.
Right. Yeah.
It does come out of nowhere, but I'm also like, that checks out. Actually does check out a lot.
I was a little bit, but I was like, is this gonna be a movie where like he never actually lays a hand on any of these people? Because
that would be
like,
interesting.
That would be like really interesting and clever. And then of course the movie like abandons that by the end as well.
No, I agree. I agree 100% with that. That I was a little. If I had any disappointment in this movie, it's that it becomes a movie.
Yeah, it becomes like very conventional by the end.
It becomes now we're a horror movie, and now we're
to
doing
like
horror
Sister, what's her name, Sister Barnes, like coming back to life and hitting him on that. She's just been chilling the whole time,
Yeah,
that part was very. I did not like.
I
that
did
at
think
all.
I thought the point is much more powerful.
Yeah,
if the women hadn't been in cages.
Yeah,
right, which is making an ancillary point that is also powerful. But
right.
I like
Jeff,
the idea
I know writers who use subtext. I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards. FYI.
So. right. The notion that that he's trying to put forth throughout the movie, which is like, you chose this, you're here of your own accord. you all along the way, you made every choice that led you here. I think that all that stuff is so awesome. And then by the end, it's like, well, ladies in cages who are being starved to death. It's like, well, you're undermining your own point, which is also sort of the point of the movie, is that he's undermining his own point. But like, I think it would have been cool if it had even cooler if it had been consistent throughout and managed to still
Jeff, fortunately, I can't conceive of an actual situation where one of the worst internet commenters of all time convinces women that it's their idea for him to control their bodies. Like
get them to make the decision, active choice.
I
give him power.
Yeah. I mean,
that will never happen. Will never happen.
The movie is so unbelievable in that way that it's like,
yes.
Any women it's a fantasy.
Given the choice, a free and unfettered choice to
surely a majority of white women would not make that decision.
Our kindness culture makes this possible. Watching this movie made me think of Resurrection, by the way, a movie which really sticks in my head. And Tim Roth, remember Tim Roth is in that movie?
Yeah.
Doesn't actually lay a hand on Rebecca Hall.
Yeah.
It's all idea control and referencing things that happened in the past, sure. But
that movie is creepy as fuck.
So creepy, so menacing, just by his sheer the way he kind of postured himself and the way he controlled her with ideas.
Yeah.
This movie, I would have loved for Hugh Grant to kind of lean into that a little more before we got to the stabby. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on Heretic, guys? I agree with you that it sounds like we have similar thoughts on the ending, which felt very conventional to me in not a good way. But a lot of stuff that came before is like, oh, hey, we're actually talking about some big ideas here. And that's kind of nice.
People are debating, did she actually get out? Is it other girl just appearing out of nowhere? Or is that a dream sequence after she dies or something? We don't.
And then she sees the butterfly at the end too. And I will say it's kind of silly that my understanding, I didn't even clock this the first time, but my wife was like, the way she gets out is by seeing in the model that there is a vent in the wall, right? It was just okay.
He built the model to such perfect scale that
she,
Which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, I guess.
There's some cool visual stuff with the model and how, I mean,
there's that scene where she's she's trying to get out of the basement, and then it shows you that she's in the model. That was kind of cool. I like
so
that.
Rad.
I like that. Yeah. But
there's so much right this movie does. I don't fault it much for kind of getting back on rails a bit by the end because it's, I don't know. I that's okay. You could still deliver the movie that people want to see, but you have this kind of, that's the sugar that makes the medicine of the big ideas go down, I think is, I think I love that it has these sort of unconventional heroes too, that don't usually get their time in the sun. I'm not big on organized religion, but I just still think it's cool that these these are not the characters that you usually elevate to leading character status, And I thought that was interesting and unconventional. There's just so much fun, smart stuff that goes on.
There's a lot to chew on in this movie. I kind of really dig that.
Yeah, let me highlight a few fun moments from the movie that I really appreciated. So I thought when it's first revealed that the candle is blueberry pie, that's a nice moment because you kind of know it's coming and then it happens, right?
So can I tell you a quick little thing? Because
you went to the smell-o-vision, right?
Yeah, I talked about this in the after. I had a special screening. Obviously, I've mentioned that Hugh Grant thing happened afterwards, but it was at the Alamo Draft House, so Alamo serves food. I talked about this in the After Dark, so forgive me, patrons, for repeating myself. But they pumped in the smell of the blueberry pie, and then we actually learned, I didn't know this going in, but it wasn't just smell. They actually served us, everybody in the theater. It was a press screening, but they served all of us blueberry pie in the middle of the movie because it's Alamo Draft House. You could serve food in the middle of the movie in that theater, which is probably why they chose Alamo Draft House, so they could do that. But it was a wild moment for me because we are eating the pie at the exact moment that we find out there is no pie. They served us pie.
The pie is a lie.
The pie is a lie. And I thought that was very funny.
I like Hugh Grant's contraption for locking his front door. I thought that
So
was
cool.
kind of. They never really explained.
You're like
exactly
taking
how that
notes. Yeah.
works. Yeah, taking notes.
Could be useful,
notes.
actually, over the next couple of years.
That was my favorite like dialogue interaction was when he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, like my front door is locked and I can't unlock it." And Sister Barnes is like, "Well, that's pretty unusual, don't you think to have a front?" He's like, "Yeah, I know, but what are you gonna do?" Like they have this whole like conversation, and I was just like,
You can just go out the back. You can just go out the back. It's like, why wouldn't your back door have a lock on it?
Yeah, it's
creepo.
And the whole time when they're like negotiating what to say and what not to say, like, again, I love the first
awesome
45, like the first half to third of this movie is just like them negotiating what to say, what not to say. You're in this like upsetting situation. You don't know what to do.
The part
right?
where they find the key in the wrong pocket. The bike lock key has been put in the other girl's pocket.
Yeah.
Just an awesome, like, the realization that, well, the key has been taken out of one pocket and put in a different pocket. What does that mean? That means he probably unlocked our bike, like all of that. It's so rad.
There's a nice big head fake when Topher Grace, wearing like really bad white hair, shows up and he's like, "I have one question for you," and you think he's going to bring up the bikes.
Yeah.
And that's like a nice moment where like the movie's like it doesn't say it, but it knows you're thinking about the bikes.
Yeah.
And then like later it pulls back to reveal the bikes are gone, and that's like a great, there's some great stuff in the movie.
Great stuff.
I'm not saying the movie's bad. But yeah, the ending definitely left something to be desired.
I do like the explorations of how culture reuses things, how ideas get reused. Like and then that kind of unlocks why that song is in the trailer too. Because I remember seeing this trailer first time. I'm like, that sounds like
Creep.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
That's such an awesome moment. And like the discordant sort of poppy music to this dark conversation, and it's sort of like too loud, which is kind of disorienting in its own way. And he's doing all the stuff with the versions of the board game, and then it's just so awesome. Love it.
One of my favorite touches from the movie is Hugh Grant often drinks from a cup that says hubby on it. And so there's a mug, and then later on I think he has like a thermos. So he really decked out he wanted to go for the full illusion of being a husband, which I thought was also...
Ladies, why is this guy single?
Yeah.
The only other thing that the movie doesn't account for at all is like, it sure seems like there's been a lot of missing persons in this area recently.
Yeah.
Like if he's got cages full of people in his basement, it feels like maybe we would be aware that there's been missing people.
Right, like they keep sending these missionaries. Like for some reason, whenever we send a Mormon missionary to this guy's house, we never see them again.
Well, I didn't.
This time. Yeah.
I didn't get the impression that these were all Mormon missionaries in cages. I feel like he's just gotten to Mormonism today, but he's been doing it with.
So some of them are Jehovah's Witnesses.
Who knows? Yeah, exactly.
And some of them are Protestants, and so on, right?
Right.
Yeah. All right. Anyway. Heretic. Good stuff in the movie.
Good movie.
A movie that all of us enjoyed to some degree or the other. At the end of the day, it is really impressive that Scott Beck and Bryan Woods made a movie. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.